All right, see you in a bit.
See you soon.
It's your time, it's showtime. It's about to drop. I'm a champagne bottle and I'm about to pop. Cream of the crop. Gonna ride this rocket till I'm at the top. Curtains calling, take your seats. Lights, camera, action, baby.
Very few race car builders can claim as many class wins as Abarth, with over 700 podium wins in the period. Carlo Abarth was born in Vienna, working as an engineer, primarily designing motorcycles as well as racing them, and he became the European champion 5 times. He moved to Italy in 1934, and after World War II founded Abarth NC, using his astrological sign, the scorpion, as his logo.
Abarth began in association with Fiat in 1952, using Fiat as the basis for many of the racing cars the company produced. Abarth then went on to enter as many competitions as possible, mostly with smaller displacement engines, using some of the funds to grow and develop the cars, continually improving their placements. Abarth truly dominated with no significant competition until the development of the Mini Cooper.
Although based mostly on Fiat mechanicals, several of Abarth's cars were rebodied by a range of coach builders, especially Zagato, in order to decrease weight and improve aerodynamics. Few of those were more successful than the Fiat Abarth 750GT Zagato, nicknamed the Double Bubble due to its raised roof sections. The car was based on the Fiat 600, premiering in 1955, with an increased displacement and tuned engine putting out 42 horsepower in a car that weighs under 1,200 pounds, or 544 kilos. The Double Bubble proved successful on the track, being raced throughout Europe and the United States, with production numbers exceeding most other Abarth-tuned cars. There are 2 things that we collect in the Haugland Collection that intersect here with this car. One of them is Abarths, of which we have 5 different Fiat 600-based derivatives. One of the other things we collect is Zagato-bodied cars, including Fiats, but also with Lancias, Alfa Romeos, and others that happen to also have been bodied by Zagato. So in this episode, we are not only highlighting this special car, but we are also giving you a glimpse as to why Zagato and Abarth cars are so prevalent in the Haugland Collection. I'm Alex Haugland.
And I'm Amy Haugland.
And this is our 1959 Fiat Abarth 750GT Zagato Double Bubble.
Welcome to Everyday to Exotic.
This isn't your typical father's Fiat, unless your father was really, really cool. So Abarth designed these cars pretty much with the intention that they'd be raced. It is a street legal car. It is a car that you could drive regularly under most conditions. The design was really intended to be very light, very aerodynamic, clean, and relatively quick, even though it has a very small engine.
This individual car has some race history, and thus it has some modifications. So it's not original completely. However, it's a really nice driver.
The color on this car actually also isn't necessarily original for this car, but it is a color that actually Zagato used to paint Aston Martins that they ended up doing custom bodies for. It's a nice metallic Aston Martin Zagato green. So very, very cool color, and at least echoes other Zagato products. There isn't really a lot of reinforcement to this car. If you take a look at the frame underneath the skin, most of it is very, very light. It barely is there just to give something for the skin to be shaped around. Front end collisions, the front end would get bashed all the way in. Same thing on the back, the sides, whatever. There wasn't really a lot in the structure to basically keep the car in pristine shape. So a lot of these have suffered that damage at some point, usually on the track, and some have been repaired very well, some very badly.
When this car was built, they did not expect it to be around 50 years later. It was a race car. They expected it to be thrashed and possibly crashed into a tire wall, as many of them were.
This one, fortunately, is still in pretty good shape, despite having had some race history.
In order to aid with the aerodynamics, the headlights are inset, and then they have these plastic covers to help with wind resistance. One of the first things that people generally do when they're prepping a car like this for racing is they take off and subsequently lose the little bumperettes. that would be up here if this was a street car. However, we do have this really cool trim piece right here with the Abarth Scorpion, which I think is pretty neat.
You may notice that there really isn't a radiator visible in the front. That's because the engine's in the back. There is actually a little radiator tucked in the front, but we'll get to that later. The body itself is actually made out of aluminum, and it's over a very light steel frame in order to basically reduce the weight and keep the car as light as possible.
The roofline is low in the middle and high on the sides, hence the double bubble name. The reason for this is that for driver's comfort, there are these bubbles that make room for racing helmets or taller drivers.
Tall people problems. Amy doesn't have those issues. One of the things I really like about these Zagato-bodied cars is the way that they actually installed the glass in them. It is not your typical big rubber seal with an insert lock strip holding it in place. Instead, what they did is they actually fitted the glass to the aluminum body using a sealing compound against the body itself. They held it in place with like little bits of wood and screws and things from the inside. Not necessarily very structural, but you don't see it once the rest of the interior is put together. But it gives it a very clean, aerodynamic look, especially when they fit this beautiful aluminum trim around it to just finish it off. As we move back, one of the other things that's a feature here that you'll see are these little scallops cut into the side. These are actually to let air out of the car as you're going down the road. If your window's down, you have air coming in, you need to let it out again in order to actually have airflow, which when you're racing, to be honest, it gets very hot in there in a full racing suit and helmet and everything, and you get sweaty and it gets pretty miserable. So this at least allows some airflow to come through. And usually when you're racing, you don't have a driver's side window, or if you do, it's wound all the way down. The side window here has these little scallops that are open into the inside, but then there's also this little tiny door on the inside that's hinged, so if you really wanted to close it off, you could reach in and theoretically flip that closed to block them off. It doesn't really seal well, it never really was intended to, but again, this was really intended to be more of a race car.
Here we are at the back. You'll notice the double bubble shape gets echoed down here into these two vents. The engine is under here. The vents allow air to get inside, and then the air comes out down here with these two vents at the back.
As well as right here through the vent that's hidden in the shape of the car.
I really like chrome because it's shiny. There's not a lot of bright work on this car, and what there is mostly made of aluminum. Aluminum is lighter, and so therefore that's why they used it. One of the things that Alex mentioned is how fitted these windows are to the car. And this is really emphasized on the rear window because it is so curved. And that's not easy to do with glass.
Or for that matter, making that aluminum trim by hand.
Oh yeah.
These cars were truly hand-built. They were not all made the same. They tended to have little variances from production to production, from car to car. You couldn't take a door or an engine cover off of one car and expect it to fit any other of the Zagato-bodied cars in this era. These were really, truly hand-formed, hand-shaped cars. And you see that in some of them. You'll see differences in some of the cars from Zagato at this time period of taillights. You'll see definitely differences in the shape of the rear fender. A lot of them have this sort of subtle peak right here. Others, it's much more pronounced, goes deeper and flares out more. It really is quite unusual, the range of forms that these cars took, despite the fact that technically they were all the same model, same design.
That's another thing that makes them difficult to restore, is you can't just go out and get a panel and just put it on there. You have to have someone who knows what they're doing and can work aluminum. Otherwise, it's never going to fit properly.
The wheels on this are steel, as were typical, but they are actually Abarth specific, with their 7 vents, these raised vents all around, and then the Abarth badge hubcap.
You can't stop me now. You can't stop me now.
This is one of my favorite Zagato things. These are the door handles. They are flush to the side of the door. Again, aerodynamics. This was fairly new back then, but you're seeing these on new cars too, like Tesla. Operates the same way. Push a button, pull a lever, open the door. Let's go to the interior. Welcome to the interior. So there's not a lot here. It's very simple, kind of Spartan. This is a race car. You don't have a lot of luxuries in here. Most of the interior is fairly typically Fiat. This is based on a Fiat 600. However, there are details that are definitely Abarth. For instance, this gauge cluster, the arrangement and the size and everything like that is typically Abarth. You will see this in Abarth race cars. The tachometer is in the middle. That's what the driver needs to be paying attention to. And then you have your miles per hour gauge over here. And then on the other side, you have water, oil, and gas. One of the interesting things is this is an American market car. And so therefore the speedometer is in miles per hour, not kilometers. Less math, that's nice. The steering wheel is appropriate for an Abarth car. And then of course you have the little Abarth details all over the place. One of the things that I love is that you can see the racing history in a lot of the details. There's a sticker here. There are inspection stickers on the roll bar. The roll bar, by the way, is a modification for actual racing. That would not have come stock. The controls are typical for a Fiat 600, but they're kind of interesting. For instance, you have these two levers right here. This one is your choke. This one is your starter. So you would turn your key to the start position, and then you pull the lever to actually fire up the engine. The one sort of luxurious thing about the interior of this car is the upholstery. This fabric is brocade. We are fairly sure that this interior is mostly original to the car. The rubber floor mats are also very typical of a Fiat 600. You know, you have your gas, your brake, your clutch, and all those things. However, if you look at the pedals, those are definitely for people with little feet. I wouldn't have any problem. But this is why racing shoes were invented. These are typical door panels of Zagato-bodied cars. They have this gorgeous sort of center door pocket that has the brocade that matches the seats. It's all very coordinated and shiny. The one downside of this interior is that there's nowhere to put my knitting. There isn't even a shelf. However, that was typical of the regular Fiat 600s too, so I guess I can't complain too much. Another fun feature is this. This is the windshield washer pump. This isn't just a button. If you want to clean your windshield, you have to push this repeatedly in order to squirt enough stuff onto your windshield so that the windshield wipers can clean it off for you.
That's a lot.
Not something I would want to do a lot. So the Fiat 600 had a rear seat. This does not have a rear seat. Therefore, you have a little bit of room, I guess, to go grocery shopping after your track day. You could probably fit a couple of boxes of wine back there, but it would be hard to get them in or out.
So with the engine in the back, everything that on most cars tends to be in the back ends up in the front. That said, there really isn't a lot of room up here. What we end up having actually is your gas tank, and this is the way you get to it, is by opening the hood. Your spare tire up here at the front, and your batteries actually touch down here right above the front suspension. Other than that, there's really not much room here to put anything else. So you could maybe toss a few tools in here, but really not much. And then as we shift over to the back, we can actually get to the other end of the car where the engine actually is. Underneath this engine cover, which lifts up, then the prop with the spike goes up, fits in a hole here, and props it open.
I'm so fresh.
This is based on a Fiat 600. What they did is they took the body of a Fiat 600, cut off the bits they didn't need, kept the floor pan, kept things like the firewall here, and some of the other bits and pieces, and they basically built the skin of this car over the top of it. The colors and things on this are not necessarily original. This was a race car. You want to make the engine bay have a little bit of bling. So we do have the block painted red as well, but then we also have some nice aluminum parts like the aluminum head, all of the timing chain covers and things like that. That is the type of thing that you typically would see frequently on race cars as you're building them. It's not necessarily the color it originally would have been in an Abarth. In general, the layout of this engine is pretty much as would be typical for one of these cars. This engine's actually an 850cc motor. This originally would have been an Abarth 750cc. It's been swapped out probably in order to basically be more competitive while racing. That type of thing is pretty common over the life of these cars. As class rules change, different displacements came in, you could upgrade your engine, be a little bit more competitive, as long as the rules allowed it. Some of the things that you also see in here that are pretty specific to the race regulations are things like this old oil can held in by a piece of wire that is attached in order to basically catch any oil vapors that come off of the engine, off of the breathers. That is usually a race requirement to make sure that those vapors and things don't end up out on the track and make things slippery. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same setup as what these engines originally had. You've got an inline 4-cylinder, very small engine. It has dual barrel downdraft Weber carburetor. Your exhaust coming off the other side has these headers, which are typical Abarth. The exhaust tip on this is actually from the original race exhaust that's on here. We actually welded in a little piece in order to quiet it down a little bit so that it's not quite as loud and obnoxious on the street. Keeps me from getting pulled over. Other changes you will see in here, however, are things like, for example, the original voltage regulator, because this still has a generator in it. The original voltage regulator has been replaced with a solid state unit. Much more modern, easier to get, easier to set up. It makes it a good driver. It's not necessarily original. This is actually the correct original distributor, this little tiny thing with your distributor cap on top. One of the things I find really unusual about these Fiat engines is the way that they set up the water cooling system. You had a rear-mounted radiator here that draws in air from under the car and has the fan and everything running off of a pulley that runs off of the engine itself. And so the pulley goes from the crank around the generator, from around the generator to this, which is actually also your water pump. And so these are your coolant lines here and things as it goes into the block as well. And it also spins the fan, cooling the radiator itself. This is a little bit of a compromised design. When you're out on the track generating a lot of heat, turning 6,000 RPM plus all the time, you need to basically be able to cool this engine. And so this car actually has an additional radiator tucked up under the front nose. A little tiny narrow one helps get that airflow because it's directly in the racing air. In front of this engine is a 4-speed gearbox. Basically, it's a variant of the stock Fiat 600 gearbox. Abarth had a tendency to put in their own gear ratios, however. They even did some very customized ones. Like I have a car that has a Abarth-built, Abarth-only 5-speed variant. This one is pretty much a stock 4-speed gearbox, but it actually still suits the car very well. The suspension on this is actually a swing arm design, so it is fully independent in the rear, with each side basically having its own swing arm and its own axle shaft coming off of the transmission to the wheel itself. The front, what they ended up doing is they ended up doing a transverse leaf spring, which is your bottom spring mount, and then the upper mount is a pair of upper A-arms. So the leaf spring basically is mounted in the middle, and each end of the leaf is attached to one of the rear hubs. And so as you go over bumps, it would flex up on whichever side, giving you independent suspension, but in a very simple, very light solution. It really suits this car very well overall. There are conversion kits to basically turn that into a lower A-arm with coilover shocks and things along that line. This doesn't have that. This is all still basically as they were built from the factory.
1, 2, yes, I'ma do more, I'm trying to talk less. 1 foot at a time, but I'm walking with my chest. Name ring bells, I ain't talking about a text.
Closing up, we have to put our spike back down lest it stab through the hatch. Close it up and latch it.
Two-stepping in the house one time, I can really feel the bass. Yeah, yeah. I know you wanna come get some.
So, here we are, driving along in this little Fiat double bubble, which is totally sized for me. I absolutely love that part of it. It is an absolutely glorious day to be doing this. We're getting into summertime. It's when our weather starts getting really good for driving, and the nice thing is it's still relatively cool today, so the fact that this car doesn't have air conditioning is not an issue. We are on the open road, which is honestly where this car loves to be. It really likes turns and stuff, but it doesn't like frequent stop signs. It doesn't complain. It just is really, really happy right now, I feel like. I would kind of like it to have a 5th gear It only has 4. This is based on a Fiat 600, which was an economy car. It was like, you will have 4 gears and you will like it, but it's also totally happy revving really high. So it's not a problem. It is fun and responsive. It's got good brakes. It's got good acceleration. I can very easily keep myself centered in my lane. Turns really well. I don't have to turn it very much to get it to go exactly where I want it. And it sounds like a beast. You do have to rev the engine pretty high on that top gear, but it doesn't sound like it's whining. It's not unhappy about revving so high. It's like, yeah, I can take it. Very good exhaust note, which I appreciate very much. Things I don't like. The steering wheel is right across my line of vision, so I have to look up or I have to look down, and it feels very like I'm way older than I actually am.
It's a giant steering wheel for a tiny car.
It is, which makes it more maneuverable, but is kind of like, what? It's just in an inconvenient place for my exact height. I don't think that I would enjoy driving this on the freeway, not because I don't think it could handle it, but because there's a lot of big trucks on the freeway, the car is small and low, and I don't know about visibility.
The other thing is, honestly, it's not quiet in here.
No, it is not.
So it's one of those things where if I were listening to the engine droning at the same speed, same sound for 2 hours driving to Portland from Eugene, it would be kind of miserable, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun on windy roads. It's a lot of fun on backcountry roads. Not really a highway touring car.
Yeah, I wouldn't take this on a road trip. Well, also, you don't have a lot of room for things like luggage. But it's a really great, I'm going out for a fun drive like today, and I just want to enjoy the experience. I don't need a radio. I don't need anything other than you and me in the car.
Yeah.
I also find that cars of this era, partially because of the stick shift, partially because this is a race car, there's no frills, is it encourages you to interact with the car, to pay attention to the car, and to just be more aware of the experience. And I really like that, honestly. There are times when that is really great.
It's a lot of fun, honestly, being out in this.
It is. This is definitely a car where you are focused on the driving experience. And that's what this car is for.
You wanna come get some? I got it, no doubt. Yeah. I got that juice. I got it, no doubt. Yeah. I know you wanna come get some.
Part of the thing I love about driving these tiny cars is that you basically drive it with your foot mashed to the floor most of the time.
Yes.
You just use all the power and acceleration. I've only got 850 cc's here pushing me along. So it's a matter of making full use of that as much as I can. Drive it like a race car, drive it like you stole it.
Which, to be clear, we did not.
Yes.
I got everything they need.
I mean, this is a sort of a quintessential Abarth in a lot of ways. Small engine, high revving, lightweight, good performance. We're very low to the ground, which means we've got a low center of gravity. The car is very lightweight. It just makes up for a lot of that with just having a lot of zip to it. I mean, it just handles curves beautifully. The wheels are well placed. The balance is actually pretty good, especially for a rear engine car. But that rear engine just doesn't weigh very much, so that helps a lot. And it takes corners so beautifully. You feel like you hardly need to slow down. Just basically power right through it.
I mean, I was hardly touching the brake at all. It was just take your foot off the gas a little bit,
Let
go
it coast
around
a
the
little bit,
corner.
then hit the gas again as you come around, coming out of it. Tap the brakes, set the nose, hit the gas, drive it like a race car.
And it's funny because it sort of encourages you to do that.
Yeah.
Even with me, and I have no experience racing.
Yeah. You keep going faster and faster without really paying attention to it.
Yes. But your instinct is to feed it gas through the turn and that kind of thing that I've heard you talk about when you were talking about racing.
I mean, the main issues with this car are how diminutive it is. It's a Fiat Abarth 750GT double bubble Zagato, which the name's longer than the car is. It's one of those things where when you're driving this along, especially in modern traffic, you get a truck next to you, they can't see you at all. Fortunately, with its exhaust, they can probably hear you, unless they've got a giant exhaust or whatever.
And even though it's loud, I am really enjoying this with the windows down. I love the wind in my hair and the whole thing. This is great.
Yeah, the airflow through the car is pretty good with the windows down. You've got plenty of air coming in. It's a bit cramped. Again, that's not necessarily bad in a race car. It helps you keep you in your place. At the same time, it also means that when the windows are down, you're basically half out the window.
This is true.
So you're in the airflow pretty much all the time.
Yep.
So this car has a small gas tank, which is another downside. You can't really go long distances without burning through it pretty quick. And when you're revving pretty high all the time, you're burning a fair amount of fuel in one go.
I didn't think about that. But this car was not built to be fuel efficient.
Nope. Yeah, overall, I love this car. It's fun.
I do too.
It's a very approachable, high-performance car.
Yeah, it's perfect for a road like this and a day like this.
Yeah.
I feel really lucky that we live where we do.
Okay, we've made it back to the studio, and it's time to go over the Haugland Score. Here's how it works.
Alex and I have individually rated the car in 5 categories, each with a rank of 0 to 10. Then we add our scores together to give us the final Haugland score.
After we combine our scores, the results go up on the board.
Their first category is performance. I gave it a 7. It's very responsive, it accelerates well, it brakes well, but it's definitely not as powerful or quite as responsive as some of the other cars in our collection.
I gave it a 6. It handles really well. It's a good momentum car. You feel like you're flooring it all the time, which is fun. It's fun to drive a slow car fast. The problem is, it is a kind of a slow car. It's not as fast as most of the other sports cars in our collection, but what do you expect from 850 cc's? Next category is styling. Styling is one of the areas that I think this car excels. I love the Zagato styling. Zagatos can be hit or miss. This one is definitely a hit, and so I gave it a 9.
I also gave it a 9. I love how the double bubble top is echoed in the vents in the back, the simplicity of it, how there's no real extraneous decoration. Everything that is shiny is also functional.
Absolutely.
So our next category is drivability. I gave it a 5.
Wow.
As much fun as this car is to drive, I would never use it as a daily driver. I would be terrified of taking it on the freeway. I would be afraid of parking it anywhere. You can't carry a lot of stuff in it. It is fun, but it's not practical.
That's why I'm kind of surprised you gave it a 5. I gave it a 3 for exactly the same reasons. It's not something I feel is necessarily safe to drive daily in modern traffic. And frankly, you're going to be stopping for fuel all the time. It's a great track day car. It's a great, let's go have fun for an hour or two on the back roads like we did today. But it's not something I would drive every day.
All of that is true. I would come down to a 4, thinking about it.
For significance, I gave this car a 9. It is significant in the race history for Abarth. It's very significant in the history of Fiat. And it's also very significant for our collection because the 2 things that I collect are Abarths and Zagato-bodied cars. And this checks all of those boxes.
And I gave it an 8 for very similar reasons. It is significant as an individual vehicle with its individual racing history, not just the double bubble in the wider history of racing. And finally, we get to my favorite category, which is delight. I gave it an 8. It was a blast to drive. It was really fun. It looks great. It makes me happy every time I look at it. People waved at us a lot when we were out driving it. It obviously sparks joy in other people as well.
I gave it a 9. People like cars. Everyone loves a tiny car. And this is a tiny car.
It's very true.
And it's a type of thing where it's like everyone looks at it and goes, oh, it's a cute tiny car. And someone who's about 6 feet tall just got out of it. How the heck do you even fit in that thing?
That does add to the delight.
It adds a lot to the delight. And so everyone loves these things, and I love it too. We've done the math, and that gives us a final score of 72 for our 1959 Fiat Abarth 750GT Zagato Double Bubble. That puts it in 7th place, tied with the 1973 Triumph Stag.
Wait a minute. We can't have that.
No, we can't. We're here to rank these cars as to which is the better car. Therefore, we have to resolve this.
Well, I guess it's time for Everyday to Exotic's very first Car Clash.
Bosses, the Fiat Abarth and the Triumph Score.
To make this happen, I'm going to list a couple positives for each car and a couple negatives. You do the same, and then we determine which one beats the other one out.
We'll give the winner a small bonus, just to give it its own spot in the ranking.
So, one of the big positives about this car is honestly just how purely fun it is to drive. You floor it all the time, you're just going out having a blast, doing absolutely everything, just being a silly driver.
And I would say a positive for me about this car is the styling. It is beautiful and so distinctive. It doesn't look like anything else on the road.
So for the Stag though, a big positive is the fact that I can get in it and drive it long distances and be comfortable.
You don't have to fold and unfold yourself.
I don't have to fold and unfold myself, and I come out with better hearing than I went in.
Yes. One of the best things about the Stag is that it is so easy to drive, so restful, and I feel so happy when I'm in it and so relaxed.
Completely different from this.
Yes.
As a negative, I would say for this car is just how small it is in modern traffic. It is potentially a dangerous car to be driving around with inattentive drivers.
It's a very limited car in a lot of ways because you can't use it like a regular car. It's a toy.
It's a fun toy.
It's a very fun toy, but it's a toy.
Both cars make great sounds.
They do.
The Stag has one of the best sounding V8 engines out there. That, and it has a roof that comes off, so you can enjoy it in kind of all weather.
And this one, I wouldn't want to take out in all weather. It can get pretty hot in there. It was fairly comfortable when we were driving it, but again, it is a purpose-built car, and its purpose is to go as fast as you possibly can.
I think that means that we're pretty much in agreement here.
I think so. For me, the Stag is, if I had to grade it on all of our categories, I would be more willing to push the Stag up than this, as much as I love driving both.
Okay, so agreement? Stag gets a half point.
Stag gets a half point.
Done. So, that extra half point gives the Stag a new score of 72.5 points. That puts it still in 7th place, but pushes our 1959 Fiat Abarth 750GT Zagato down to 8th.
Okay, that was really fun.
I had a lot of fun with it too, to be honest. This is the first time we've had a conflict, and something we've discussed for a while is how we want to handle it. If you think we should have done it differently, let us know. I'm fine going either way, hearing what you say, but either way, this was fun.
And that's it for another episode of Everyday to Exotic. Remember to like, subscribe, and tell your friends.
And I'm saying either way, far too much. See you next time. Bye. Okay.
I love
Sorry.
Okay, but this is what makes
leave
this.
that in rather than. Dun dun dun.
Yeah, what is the suspicious groundhog or whatever it was with the little.